So, Kira, I have a question for you.
Yeah, what you need?
Have you ever been on Facebook and you just see people like full on spilling their tea in their relationship? They're talking about how like someone's a hoe or like I knew I couldn't trust you. Have you ever had that?
Literally, yes. There's two specific occasions that pop immediately out to mind, and that's whenever someone posts a minion meme or the "Are we dating the same person" group on Facebook. That thing is freaking wild, dude.
Oh, that Facebook group is so entertaining sometimes.
She just gets me.
Yeah.
All the drama.
I have all my life have always had someone on Facebook who just spills all the tea. And sometimes it's entertaining and sometimes it's kind of funny because you'll see like a bunch of posts that are like, "Oh my god, I love you. I love you." And then it'll be a couple more posts that are like, "I knew I couldn't trust you. You are a bad person." And then bonus points if they delete it and then they post each other again about how much they love each other. Or if you're ever like, what's going on? And then they get mad because you're being nosy, even though they put it all over Facebook. It's kind of entertaining.
Yeah. No, it is. I love seeing it's like kind of reading the tabloids from like the 90s. If you
Exactly.
remember that? Yeah.
It's entertaining. And the reason I kind of mention this is because that's kind of where this case takes place. It kind of starts off with this. There was this teenage couples in 2011. It wasn't two couples, it was one couple technically. But they were both 14, 15 years old. And one of them found out one of them was cheating. And when his name was Seth Jackson, and when he found out his girlfriend, Amber Wright, had been cheating on him, he decided to make a Facebook post calling her a slut, saying she does meth, and she retaliated by saying she never loved him, that he wasn't a man. I mean, of course he's not, he's 14. And, like most teenagers, you kind of air out your drama on social media. And I feel like back in 2011, it was very common to use Facebook to vent. I know I did. And that's kind of where this case starts. And once Seth had found out Amber had cheated on him, he was just so heartbroken. He couldn't handle it. And so, of course, he went to social media to vent about it. And of course, it caused a lot of drama on Facebook. People were telling him, like, how could you call her a slut? She doesn't do meth. And when she started retaliating, he tried to tell her, he's like, know what? Let's just stop. Let's just move forward. We're both obviously heated. And I don't think anyone would have ever predicted what would happen next. And see, the thing about Amber was she was dating this guy named Mike Bargo. Now, Mike was 18, mind you, and Amber was 14 or 15. That is already pretty problematic in itself. But the thing with Seth was he did not like Mike. Mike was kind of like problematic. He was one of those edgy guys that are like 18, they're not really in school, they're not really working, kind of like a bad boy. And Seth just didn't like him. And, he had actually like whooped Mike's ass. Mind you, Mike again was 18 and Seth was 15, and so I'm sure hurt his ego. And then Mike kind of joined in this friend group because they were all kind of friends in a way. He just started to create this horrible drama. And I think to call this drama is offensive because it wasn't just drama. It wasn't just a bunch of teenagers being dramatic. It wasn't a bunch of teenagers just being teenagers. Mike wanted to do one thing, and that was to destroy the Jackson family, and he wanted to take Seth Jackson out. And if that meant killing him, then he was going to do it. Hi, welcome to the Decomposing Flower podcast. I'm your host, Jen. With me is Kira. In this podcast, we talk about all sorts of things true crime, true events. And in today's episode, we are going to be talking about Seth Jackson and the murder that took place back in 2011. I do want to give a little bit of some trigger warnings. This case is a little bit heavy. So, we are going to be talking about murder, a little bit of like mutilation. We are talking about a lot of mental health issues and like mentions of drugs and cheating, I guess, if that's kind of like a trigger warning. Anything we do say that is wrong, or if you feel like you want to correct us, or if you just want to add to the conversation, feel free to in the comments. And of course, we mean no harm to anyone who's affected by this case. This case takes place in 2011 in Summerfield, Florida. This place is kind of small. From my research, it seemed like it's a pretty decent place to live at. But it's very small. That the crime rate is very small. And everyone kind of knows each other. So when this happened, this was kind of like a big deal. I mean, of course, any kind of murder is a huge deal, but when you're in a really small town with only like 30,000 people, it's kind of scary because you don't know who's out there and it personally affects you. Seth was this 14, 15-year-old boy. And he kind of had it all at this time. He had a great family and he was like super well loved by a lot of friends and family. He was popular. He was overall like a really great person. He had a great reputation. And a lot of girls actually really liked him because, see, the thing about Seth was he was tall for his age. And like most girls at that age, when a boy is tall, of course they're gonna flock to him. And they just really, really liked him. And Seth kind of just did normal things that teenage boys do. He played video games. He also was like super into martial arts, which I think is so cool. And he hung out with his best friend, William Sam, a lot. And, they kind of just did whatever they could, but they actually started to get into drinking and partying and girls. And of course, with girls enters Amber Wright, who was this 15-year-old girl who really, really liked Seth. And her and Seth just kind of like they hit it off really, really well. They were your very stereotypical relationship where very puppy love, need to spend time with each other, but their relationship was like very tense for like 14-year-olds. They were like always like kind of arguing. They spent so much time together. They were like a little bit toxic. From what Amber has said, they kind of did whatever they could to make each other very, very jealous. And they both were insecure. And so they would kind of like, I guess, purposely antagonize each other. They would drink a little bit. They would smoke weed. And they also did a little bit of coke. And I was like pretty surprised by that because I mean, I remember being 14 and I didn't know. But I mean, I guess I wasn't really that cool either.
You were so freaking cool.
The thing about Seth's parents is they said that Amber and Seth were very, very close to each other, but they kind of felt like Amber was a little bit manipulative. And they said, like, more manipulative than the average girl. She seemed to constantly be doing things that they just, they didn't really like. But I don't think they thought too much of it at the time because I mean, she was 14. 14-year-old girls can be pretty manipulative just sometimes in general. And she kind of would just purposely like antagonize Seth. And she just started to cause a lot of issues. And so they only dated for only a few months. By March 2011, Seth and Amber had broken up because Seth had found out that Amber cheated on him with Mike Bargo. So Seth and Mike did not like each other, and Mike was pretty hostile and he kind of tried to act tough. He was definitely one of those guys that was like, "Oh, I'm gonna whoop your ass," but he was only like 5'4" and he was like weak. And one time, Seth and him got in a fight, and Seth like beat him up, and I think that kind of like made Mike's ego fall. Mike was pretty upset with Seth a lot of the time. But now, with the fact that Mike had been sleeping with Amber, the fact that Amber and Seth were together, it added a whole lot of anger and just issues. After this kind of happened, that's when Seth began to make sub posts about Amber. So, if you're not chronically online like I am, sub posts are kind of like when you're making a post about someone but you don't directly say their name. You're usually like, "I thought I could trust you. You're the worst person ever. I should have listened to my gut." That's kind of what that is. And that's kind of what he was doing. But then he began to like directly say her name and like tag her and call her a slut, say that she was doing meth. And then Amber started to get mad and she started to say that she never loved Seth and that he wasn't man enough and all this stuff. And it just started to create a lot of like issues. And so basically, Seth had said that let's just stop, let's move on. Maybe we can stay friends, but like let's just stop. See, the thing about Seth was he was madly in love with Amber. He couldn't deal with it. And his parents said like he was like very, very heartbroken. Like he had never been this sad. And his parents tried to like help him through it, saying, you've been with other girls. This is just another breakup. She'll be old news. Just move on. Just continue doing school. She won't matter anymore. Like it sucks, but just move on. But Amber kept trying to purposely hurt Seth with this. She and Mike would go to his house and like purposely make out and hold each other and hug each other and just like touch each other in front of their house. I just think that's so mean, but very juvenile behavior. I don't get the whole point of that besides just wanting to hurt Seth. So Mike, he had a lot of issues. He didn't have a good home life. His parents had split up when he was really young. His dad was a drunk and he was like pretty violent. And so his dad had left and Mike kind of blamed his mom for this and he kind of just wanted to constantly cause issues and all of this stuff and so he ended up moving away and that's when he moved with his dad to Summerfield and he had kind of been living with his dad, but he also was kind of living with his friends. He was like couch surfing. He never really graduated high school, but I think he got a GED, but he kind of just low key like a lost cause. Listen, this guy had a lot of issues. He already had been arrested twice. He had a restraining order because apparently he was chasing some kid in the neighborhood with an axe, threatening to kill this kid and his family. What? Yeah, like
Oh my God.
I know, like, yeah, and like the thing about Mike was he was known for like walking around with his handgun. To me, it's just giving really cringe. It's giving like he wants to be like this tough guy, like, look at me, I have a little handgun, don't mess with me. You know when you go on Facebook and there's always that one guy that you have on Facebook or Snapchat that's like, I'm so tough, but it's like the weakest guy you've ever met. That's kind of the vibe Mike was. And like Seth kind of saw right through it. And I think he like after beating him up once, I think he's just like, whatever. I think it was just like, teenage angst and drama where you're just like, oh my God, this guy won't leave me alone. He took his girl. Of course, he's gonna have more of an issue with this loser. He still loved Amber, but he tried to like rekindle their friendship. He tried to like stay in contact. And I think it's kind of like, how anyone's been when you're in a relationship and then you want to stay with that person, but you can't, but you want to stay friends. I think that was kind of his thing. He just didn't want to let her go. And Amber kind of like pulled him along. Like she would kind of be like, maybe we should work things out. Apparently, that's when Mike had actually heard about this and he threatened Seth. Overall, Mike was just kind of causing a lot of issues. This is so crazy, he told Seth he had a bullet with his name on it, which is
Oh my God.
actually insane. Yeah, like to me that's
Unhinged.
just like what the like what? If it was just drama, it would be very cringe, but considering what happens, it's just really scary when you think about it. So there's like a lot of people in this case and I kind of want to introduce them all because there's a lot of people. So there was of course Seth, Amber and Mike, which I've already talked about. Then there was Kyle Hooper, who was 16. He was Amber's half brother. And then there was Charlie Ely, who was 18. And then there was Justin Soto, who was 20. I'm kind of mentioning their ages just so everyone kind of understands the age group of everyone so everyone remembers that Seth was just 15. So Charlie Ely, she was this 18-year-old girl who had this like two-bedroom house, kind of like a trailer park home. I don't know the exact word for it. Her husband was in jail, and so she actually had Mike, Justin, and Kyle all live with her. And Amber would sometimes come and spend the night because she was best friends with Charlie. And I guess Amber was also there spending nights with Mike. So, from my research, because I was kind of researching about her family, because I was like, I know, like, maybe it's just from what I grew up in. When I was in high school, like, I wasn't allowed to spend nights if there were boys there. Like, that just, So I was, like, kind of, like, interested in that. Apparently, like, Amber's mom was very busy. She was working a lot, and everyone kind of knew each other, and they all, like, lived in the same neighborhood. And so they were all very close. And so Amber's mom was pretty much, just working, and she said her kids were older. She didn't want to, like, be too controlling, I think. I don't want to put words in her own mouth, but she just said like it was just kind of like normal for them to like spend the night and she was just like very busy. So I think she just wasn't very like aware of what was going on. I just assumed she trusted her kids enough to like hang out and do all this stuff. But Mike was also living at this home, right? And he had already been causing a lot of issues. there was this girl named Megan and her boyfriend Jeremy. They were living there, and one day Mike just decided to take like his little gun and like shoot it out the back window, and Megan was kind of like, "Do you mind like yeah, she was like, "Do you mind not doing that? That's kind of weird." And they got into a fight, and he threatened her with this gun and told her to leave, and so of course her and her boyfriend left, thankfully, which is just guy was very unhinged. He apparently also had like ADHD and like bipolar, but I mean, I have ADHD. I'm not threatening people with a gun. There just was like a lot of drama. And so with Amber cheating on Seth, Seth decided to kind of like, I don't know exactly if he was trying to hurt her. He apparently decided to sleep with this girl named Alyssa. And Alyssa was seeing Kyle. Now, I don't know if they were dating, if they were on a break, or if they were just like kind of like friends. I don't know. But Kyle went over to her house and he saw that Seth and her were sleeping together, and he kind of lost his shit and he like started telling Alyssa, "I'm gonna kill him." Kyle and Seth, they kind of were friends before Amber and Seth started dating, and after the whole cheating and all that happened, their friendship soured, which usually happens. I don't know if this was Seth's way to get back at Amber or to get back at Kyle, or if there was no other motive, if it was just him being a teenage boy. I don't know. With all this entire friendship group started to have a lot of issues with Seth. They didn't really like him. And on top of this, Amber had opened up to Mike, saying that Seth had been abusing her. Now, when I Googled this, there is no like proof of this. Nothing really came of it. So I'm neither gonna say it happened or it didn't, because I don't want to say it didn't happen. I don't want to say it did if it didn't. So I'll just leave it at that was Amber's words, but from what I know, Amber was pretty manipulative, so I don't know. Basically, this is kind of where it sparked a lot of hate. So one night, Mike, Kyle, and Seth were all on the phone call, and they were basically like, let's get this over with. And so Seth and his friend Michael, they decided to go and meet up with these guys and to just get this fight over with. But when they started to go over there and they were like walking towards Charlie's house, they heard gunshots coming from the house. And so they were like, oh my God, let's get out of here. So they booked it. And there just seemed to be a lot of issues. And Mike just seemed to be, constantly threatening Seth all these weird things. And this was like a week prior to when the case really happens. And so one day they were all hanging out, Charlie, Amber, Kyle, Mike, Justin. And that's when Mike said to Amber, we should kill Seth. And of course, at first they think he's joking, but then he's not. And they're like, oh, okay, interesting. And so that's when they decided to get this plan and destroy this problem, and that problem being Seth. Basically, Mike told Amber, you need to invite him over. And so on April 17th, 2011, it was kind of like any other day. It was just a pretty normal day. Seth was hanging out with his friend Michael, and Michael had kind of noticed that Seth was texting his Amber again, and he was kind of doing what most friends do, where he was like, dude, just forget about her, move on. Seth was like, I know, but like, I still want to be with her. Michael just kept telling him, like, she's bad news, dude. Like, just don't talk to her anymore. And that didn't really stop Seth. Seth kept talking to Amber, and Amber had basically been saying to Seth, why don't we like just talk this all out? And she said she wanted to work things out with Seth. Seth was, I think, just so in love with her that he was kind of like, okay, yeah. At first, he was a little bit weary because Amber was like, let's meet up over here at Charlie's house. And then she had mentioned that Charlie was going to be there. And she was going to be there for support. He had texted Amber saying, like, if you're going to get me jumped, you can forget about me because I will never forgive you. And she kept telling him, no, like, don't worry. It's just going to be her and me. Mike and Kyle aren't even home. Like, don't worry about it. And so Seth was like, okay. And he trusted her. And so he left Michael's place around like 9:15, and then he headed to Charlie's place. So this plan was for Amber to lure Seth into the home, and that Mike and Kyle and Justin would ambush Seth and then shoot him, but the plan didn't really go like that. So when Seth actually arrived, Amber was supposed to send this warning text, and she never did. And Justin was supposed to hit Seth over the head, but that didn't happen. Seth was kind of in the living room just sitting and talking to Amber. Mike and Kyle were in Mike's room and they were debating if they should even go through with this. And then Kyle looked out and he could see Seth sitting on on the couch or whatever in the living room. He said he felt pressured to do this. So I don't know if Mike was like talking in his ear being like, remember how he like took your girl or whatever, or if he just felt pressured, like just in general. That's when Kyle grabbed a piece of wood, ran into the living room, and he had hit Seth over the head really hard. And that's when Mike followed after and he had shot Seth. Seth was a fighter and he fought hard. He got up and tried to run out through the back door and tried to get out, and I think he actually got towards the road, but then Justin had actually tackled him. Mind you, Justin is a 20-year-old man tackling a 15-year-old boy. They apparently tackled him down, and, Seth kept trying to fight it off, but that's when Mike came in and shot him a few more times. And then he called for Kyle to come out, and they all dragged Seth back into the bathtub. The reason for the bathtub was so Seth would know who was killing him. Mike wanted Seth to know. While Seth was in the bathtub, Mike just began screaming at him, cursing at him, and then he shot him in the face. During all of this, Charlie and Amber were cleaning up the blood in like the kitchen and in the living room. And then Kyle could actually hear Mike breaking Seth's kneecaps and was screaming and all that. And so Kyle actually rushed in. But he didn't rush in to kind of be like, hey, like, what are you doing? This is crazy. What are we doing? Because, sometimes people like kill and then they have that moment where they're like, oh my God, I can't believe I just did that. And they realize. But no, Kyle was more worried about the neighbors hearing, which I just think is so crazy that that's what he was worried about, not the fact that they just killed someone. And
God.
so the main reason Mike wanted to break Seth's kneecaps was because he wanted to put him into a sleeping bag, and he apparently also pulled out Seth's teeth with a plier, and they put him into the sleeping bag. Justin and Mike had dragged Seth into the fire pit in the back of Charlie's house, and they just killed him, just like that. Apparently, he was fighting really, really hard until his last moments, and I just think that's so sad to know that he almost got away and then he didn't. But it doesn't really end there. So after they kind of burned his body, they just kind of like left him like that. And they all started to kind of hang around the bonfire. Like, what? They all kept trying to clean up. But eventually, Kyle said that Amber and Mike went to bed and then they just went to sleep, which I just think is so crazy. Like, how do you just kill someone and then just go to bed? And then Kyle tended to the fire because the neighbors came out and they were complaining about how the fire was so big. In the morning, Mike could kind of tell that Seth's body wasn't completely burned. So he took a shovel and took some paint cans and just overall like buckets and took up the remaining parts of Seth that were now charred and just put them in buckets. And then he called James Haven. And James Haven was this like 37-year-old guy, and he was the stepdad to Kyle. And basically said, can you come to the quarry with me and Justin? And he said, okay, yeah, I'll take you guys there. So James claims that he never knew exactly what he was doing, but when they got to the quarry, they had these like buckets, right? And then they apparently were covered, but they had all these buckets and they tied 2 cinder blocks to them and then just threw them in the lake. I'm sorry, he claims like he didn't know. If someone was like, can you take me to the quarry? And I was like, okay, fine. And then I saw they had buckets and they tied 2 cinder blocks to it. Like, what? Like, I'd be like, what's in those buckets? Like, what? Like, I don't know. Like, to me, I feel like he was kind of bullshitting that, but I don't know. Maybe he really didn't know and he's just that not aware. But we'll kind of talk a little bit more about James later. By like Monday morning though, the police had already been looking for Seth because he didn't come home. His friends hadn't heard from him, and his parents said like Seth would never go without calling them. They said like this was very weird and they just had kind of like a bad feeling. And so they had already called the police and like the police were looking for him. And Mike, Justin, and James, they all returned back from the quarry. Kyle was at work And on their way home, James got a call from his ex wife, Tracy, who is the mother of Amber and Kyle. And she was basically like, hey, like the police are looking for Seth. They don't know where Seth is. And they want to speak with Kyle and Amber and Mike. And so James was like, oh, okay. And he's like, I'll drop off Kyle and all that. And she was like, okay. But when they picked up Kyle from work, they basically told him everything about the police investigation. And then Mike asked Kyle if he could give him money so he could go visit his ex girlfriend. He did. And then James dropped Kyle off at a nearby gas station. And then he drove Mike to go see his ex girlfriend. I just think that's really interesting that he did that. And before Kyle got home, he actually went to Mike's dad's house to tell his dad everything. And then that's when he went to go to Tracy's home, and then the police were there. And apparently he was like really like emotional, and so the police were like, we're gonna read you your rights, we're gonna ask you a few questions, and then they kind of just like went on with their day. Charlie, Kyle, and Amber all stayed at Tracy's place, and they apparently were like a mess, which obviously they were. Tuesday morning, there was this broadcast, and it was about Seth. And it was like, if you've seen Seth, please contact us. And that's when Kyle just told his mom. He said that he knew who had killed Seth and that he had watched it happen. And thankfully, Tracy was like, oh my god, and she called the police immediately, and the police came in and they were able to arrest Amber, Kyle, and Charlie, and also Justin. And apparently, like, it was a very nonchalant thing. Like, they just wanted to do some questioning, and the police, like, they didn't even handcuff them. They all willingly went in to be interviewed. And so the police then got this, like, warrant to check Mike's bedroom that was at his grandma's and also check Charlie's place. And so what they found in Mike's bedroom at his grandmother's house was a lot of ammo, which was, like, really weird. They said a lot of it. But when they went to Charlie's house, they found a lot of different things. They found like paint tin cans, they found a pressure washer, interesting, and they found a lot of charred remains in the fire pit. So, of course, they're like, that's really suspicious, and they send that to the forensics team. And then when they went inside Charlie's house, they found a lot of blood evidence all over the walls, the floors, the ceiling, and they also found a shit ton of ammo. Like, way too much ammo, where it'd be like, why is there just like random drawers of ammo? And then they also noticed that the bathroom door was disconnected. Now, I don't know if the bathroom door was disconnected previously or if it was during the murder, but they were all like, that's very weird. That's when, like, they decided to go to the quarry as well. And that's when the dive team found these 5-gallon buckets with the cinder blocks and, of course, human remains. And they were able to send that off. And at first, when they tested the remains, they didn't know if it was Seth, but then they were able to. And they found a bullet and they found, like, projectile, and it matched Mike's handgun. But at first, they couldn't fully determine if it was Mike's, like, handgun. But they eventually came to the conclusion that the cause of death for Seth was a gunshot wound and blunt force trauma. But of course, they also found at Charlie's house DNA of Amber, Charlie, Kyle, and Mike in the blood along with Seth's DNA. So of course they're like, oh my god, this is crazy. And so of course they had them all arrested, but they didn't have Mike. They didn't know where Mike was. And so where was Mike? Well, Mike was visiting his ex-girlfriend and then visiting his ex-girlfriend's dad. And so, at first, when he went to go see his ex-girlfriend Kristen, he actually confessed to Kristen and her father that he had killed Seth because Seth was apparently abusing his girlfriend. And then he went on to say that he shot Seth 8 times and then burned his body and then put him in a paint can. And then he left, went to Kristen's dad's house and was talking to Kristen's dad and the brother and also the girlfriend that was living there and told them the exact same thing. And then he also confessed to this girlfriend that he had killed another roommate of his who raped his sister. Don't know if that happened. I'm not too sure. I don't know if he was just saying that, but wouldn't put it past him. But this ex-girlfriend, her dad's girlfriend, had actually witnessed Mike break his phone because Mike got a call from his dad saying the SWAT team was looking for him, and he started to freak out and he broke his phone, but the police were able to get to him and they arrested him. So during the interrogation, it's very, very interesting because they're all being interrogated separately and they're all bullshitting and they're blaming each other and then they're blaming Mike. And Amber, at first, she claims that what had happened was that Seth was hanging out there and then Kyle came over and took a piece of wood and beat him, and then she ran away with Charlie into the bedroom, and then they stayed there for hours. But eventually, they would all kind of come to this conclusion and say that it was Mike who killed Seth, but they just kept lying and lying and lying and saying different things. And the only person who seemed to tell the truth was Kyle. And this detective, she was not letting them bullshit her. She was like, "You're gonna tell me the truth, or I'm not even gonna listen to you." And so they all finally told the truth. One of the things that's like very interesting is they didn't fully tell the truth at that moment. So they were all being like interviewed separately, and then after they were taken into another kind of room and as they were all waiting. And it was like Charlie, Amber, and Kyle, they were all waiting, and they just, I don't think they knew they were being recorded. They just completely confessed to the murder on like recording. And they were like, "I can't believe we killed him and that Mike was also a part of it. This is Mike's fault." But they just confessed to it. And I don't think they really understood what was going to happen to them because they were like, "Oh my god, everyone's going to think we're murderers." Like, well, you kind of are. They tried to bullshit it, but then it was recording. And then so the detective came in and was like, "Yeah, you guys are being arrested for murder. You guys are all going to be tried as adults because of the crime of what happened." And when Mike was there, he wouldn't talk. He was like, "I want a lawyer." And so of course, they can't interview him. They all get tried as adults because it wasn't just a murder, which I know is insane to say, but it was also exactly what they did. And they also arrest James because they were like, "James, you knew you were supposed to drop him off and you helped him avoid it." He also was there when Mike admitted to murder. And so during the testimony and in the trial, Mike, his entire story was basically that he claimed that him and Kyle got in a fight and that when they went to go see his ex-girlfriend, he was like drinking and then he got too drunk and he was like, "I'm just gonna go back." And so when he returned back to Charlie's house, that's when he had saw that everyone was crying, and then Kyle was like, "I killed Seth." And Mike tried to be like, "Oh, I'm gonna go tell the police," but then Kyle wouldn't let him and threatened to kill him. And that was kind of his entire story, but there was like no evidence to back it up. When Kyle told his story, there was a lot of evidence and it all made sense. Also, like during this time, Mike had apparently confessed to some inmates while he was in jail that he killed someone, and so the police were like, "Why would these guys tell us this and then lie? Like that wouldn't make any sense." And then he also had told his ex-girlfriend and her family, and there was just like a lot of people he was talking to. Also, he apparently had been talking about wanting to kill Seth for a while, so the police were like, "Dude, like, don't be stupid. Like, come on." I think it's so insane that he tried to be like, "Oh, no, I'm like this innocent guy." Like, dude, be serious. And so, apparently, though, one thing I think is really insane about this is apparently a neighbor also saw them tackling Seth and didn't say anything. And I never, like, understood that when people see something happening and they don't call the police, because I would rather be annoying to the police and it be nothing than assume it's nothing and then be wrong.
Yeah, like it seems so basic to be like, hey, this guy just admitted to being a murderer.
Yeah, and that's like what's so crazy to like all of it, and like the fact that there were people that kind of saw like these guys tackling him, like even if they weren't gonna like kill him, you didn't think that. I would still be like, why are these group of guys like beating him up? Like crazy. But Mike's lawyers tried to use his mental health, saying that he had all of these problems. He had ADHD, his brain wasn't normal, but it didn't really matter. They're like, no. And so they all were tried as adults, like I said, and Amber, Charlie, and Kyle were charged with first degree murder, life in prison, and without parole. Justin pled guilty and was given a life sentence as well, but James Haven, he was charged with accessory to murder. He received 10 years, and he was really suspicious because he apparently coached a lot of the teenagers on how to sanitize the crime scene. Also, apparently, heard the teens talk about killing Seth. He also received a text message from Mike saying the deed is done.
My
And he
God.
also was like driving them to the quarry. He heard Mike talk about killing Seth, and he wasn't taking Mike to the police station like he was supposed to. James Haven was actually up facing 10 to 30 years. And no, I don't really know what's happening. They said his stuff is still like awaiting because he keeps like his stuff keeps redoing it and all that and all that. So it's unknown if he's gonna be released or not in the next couple years. So Mike though, Mike was actually given a death sentence twice. The first time it was because it wasn't a full agreed upon trial and all that. And so they did a retrial, and then he was sentenced again. And then he told the judge this entire thing was a giant circus, and that if he was to be killed, that the judge was sentencing an innocent man to death, which, okay, sure. And the judge, he basically said like he had been doing this for over 32 years, and this was one of the most cold and calculated and premeditated case of murder he had ever seen in his career. And I just think that says a lot. Like, mind you, this wasn't just Mike. This was five other people a part of this. Not saying that if it was just Mike, it wouldn't be bad. But at what wouldn't someone at least be like, hey, this is really crazy. What are we doing? And then the fact that Amber lured Seth to this house, lying to him that she just wanted to talk to him, but it was so that Mike could kill him, that's crazy to me. I don't know how five people can all do that. And so apparently, Charlie is out actually. She got out, but Amber's most likely never getting out. And she tries to say that she's changed. She's not that person anymore. But I was watching like her interview, and she seems to talk a lot about herself and not like Seth. She seems to talk about just what she went through when it's like, girl, you're the reason this guy's dead. Because she was the one who lured him. So that's super crazy to me. But Seth's parents, they're really struggling, which I mean, obviously. Seth's dad, he struggles a lot with anger. It's really, really sad to watch them talk about it. His mom, really, she's trying to cope. They're really grateful that Mike has gotten the death sentence, but I don't, that's not going to take away anything. His mom says that she has sympathy for Tracy because Tracy's two kids are in jail, which is Amber and Kyle. And she tries to say like she feels sympathy that she also lost kids, but Seth's dad is kind of like, well, she at least can talk to her kids. We can't talk to our son. And that's, that is true. And I think overall, like, no one wins in this case. And it's sad, but people need to also remember, like, they all had a choice and they didn't have to kill Seth. I think it's good to just like remember Seth and not talk about the perpetrators and the murderers and talk about who Seth was. He was known as being a fighter, and that's really what he did. He fought until the very end, and he was still loved, and that's why the neighborhood and his family and his friends struggle to this day because he was loved. And that's how we should remember Seth, is that he was loved by so many people. And yeah, that's this case. And if anyone would like to give their input, or if I said anything wrong, please feel free to let me know. And we'll see you in our next episode.